Hey, what's going on, everyone? I'm not really planned for a video today, but I'm just going to go for one off the cuff about what's going on with the US-China tariffs. A lot has changed since my last video, which I did last week, and I want to quickly go through the overview of what's the tariff situation is now, and I'm going to give my prediction as to whether there's going to be a deal between China or US anytime soon. But first, let's get into what's going on by going through some articles that I thought would be interesting to share. And let's dig into what we have on Zero Hedge. And this is from last night. China escalates their tariffs on US imports to 125%, signaling that it will ignore future retaliation. And this is obviously it's bad to have China retaliate against the US. Is 145% now before the Section 301 tariffs of an additional 25 from Trump's first administration. But it's great. It's obviously not ideal that China retaliates, but it's also, they're saying that, hey, this is the most we'll go. Let's basically signaling that let's calm things down. Let's maybe just put a pause on the retaliation and perhaps we'll go to the table soon and negotiate. Let's see if Trump will hit back after China signals that they'll stop retaliating. That will obviously further escalate tensions, but who knows? It's negotiations. There are a lot of things on the table and off the table that both parties can use. But let's keep going this article. Around the close of Hong Kong trading hours, Beijing retaliated against President Trump's tariffs by hiking levies to U.S. goods to 125%, up from the prior 84%. In a notable shift, the Chinese Communist Party announced it would no longer respond to any further tariff increases from Washington. And just to quickly go through about the Chinese tariffs on U.S. goods, the 125%, it's in addition to existing tariffs before the retaliations or the recent rounds of tariff increases. For example, I import some goods to China as another business I have, and existing tariffs are about 20.5%, so now we'll be paying 145.5% for those goods, and effectively shutting down my business in China because China's gonna pay 145. It will be like doubling our costs easily to our customers, that is. As the week concludes, the US and China are locked in a heated once-in-a-century trade battle. Earlier, President Trump announced a 90-day suspension of additional country-specific tariffs for countries that have refrained from taking retaliatory measures, an apparent attempt to isolate China and use tariffs to get Beijing to strike a deal. And here's what I think about what this whole trade tariff thing from Trump's perspective is. And I think at the end of the day, it's to not only negotiate better deals with individual countries, but it's mainly targeted at China, because at the end of the day, China is the biggest trade deficit trading partner we have in the USA. So it seems like this one of the main reasons why he's going after all countries. And also, I believe that he's going after like countries like Vietnam or islands with like no population. That is to avoid people transshipping products from China to, like, let's say Vietnam or those islands and saying it's made in Vietnam instead of China to bypass those tariffs. The State Council Tariff Commission announced that China will raise tariffs on U.S. goods. Yep, we've gone through that. Given that the current tariff level, there is no marketplace acceptance for U.S. goods export to China. If the U.S. continues to impose tariffs on Chinese goods export to U.S., China will ignore it. That's a good sign. In a separate statement, the Commerce Ministry expressed, even if the U.S. continues to impose higher tariffs, it will no longer make economic sense and will become a joke in the history of the world economy. I actually think, to really drive home preventing Chinese manufacturers exporting to the U.S., the U.S. would probably have to go up to 400%, like Kevin O'Leary would always say. I think 400% will effectively shut down all small sellers selling to the U.S. of Chinese-made goods, including my Amazon business. I think that would be the breaking point. In what appears to make a pause in the escalation of bilateral trade tariff war, Beijing has shifted toward non-tariff retaliation, limiting Hollywood film imports, slowing rare earth export shipments, and allowing the yuan to weaken. I believe the yuan is like a 15-year low. I think it was 7.45. Let me double check that real quick. Yuan, USD. I know the USD is also weakening against the euro because it's a lot of uncertainty. It's 7.31, which that's not bad, but it's definitely high. Let me look at the 5-year. 5-year wise, it's basically all-time high in the 5-year chart. All right, that's one of the ways that China can do, but it's not gonna. They're gonna have to like pummel the yuan to really make a dent in those tariffs. So I don't think that really matters. Another interesting point too that takes a card away from China is the Panama Canal most likely will be given to BlackRock due to fraud dealings with Chinese companies in Panama. The Defense Secretary Hegseth, that's his name. He just came back from Panama, and the great meeting between the U.S. and Panama. They discovered a lot of fraud in China. Chinese companies handling the Panama Canal, owned by the CK Hutchinson Holdings, which is a Hong Kong company. And it's likely that even if China stops CK Hutchinson from selling it to BlackRock, Panama may default on their agreement with CK Hutchinson and sell the canal to BlackRock. And that's a big bargaining chip that China lost yesterday. So they're losing a lot of ammo, and the last thing they have really is the rare earth exports shipments being to the U.S. because they have a stranglehold on rare earth. And if we see that, then the bridges are being burned, and that's not a good sign for trade between China and U.S. This is the end of escalation in terms of bilateral trade tariffs rates. Both China and the U.S. have sent clear messages there is no point of raising tariffs further, said Zhi Weijiang, president and chief economist at Pinpoint Asset Management, quoted by CNBC. Wall Street analysts have already trimmed sales estimates for Apple and Tesla in China, and the world's second largest economy. Meanwhile, speculation mounts that Beijing may have quietly reduced its holding of U.S. Treasury bonds as part of the broader counteroffensive. I think they just need U.S. dollars because their economy is pretty fragile too. I would say more fragile than the U.S. economy. Zhao noted that assessing the U.S. and China's economic fallout will be next. He emphasized that no indication that either government is preparing to re-enter negotiations. Meanwhile, early signs of supply chain disruptions have been reported. Oh yeah, we'll talk about that next, of some articles on orders being canceled and Amazon sellers freaking out. Goldman Analysis Andrew Tilton, Huishan, and others lowered the China GDP forecast because of the trade war. They're lowering it from 4% to 3.5%, which is still not bad. And here's how they showing a chart of the effects. I'm not gonna go too much into it. And you can see that little chart we have here of the tariff rate, just parabolic, skyrocketing. It's crazy. The question becomes how long China can weather the economic storm, given U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's comments earlier this week calling the Chinese economy the most imbalanced economy in the world of the modern world. And I can tell you that this escalation is a loser for them, hence the PBOC is easing. China also reiterated that it would continue to resolutely counterattack and fight to the end if the trade war deepened. And I think both economies are a bit fragile, but the Chinese economy have been facing 40 months of continuous deflation now, mostly driven by their collapse in their real estate market. So they're already struggling, but they're chugging along, and I think this may be too much for the economy to handle, the Chinese economy, that is. Obviously, it'll hurt the U.S. as well, but I do think the U.S. economy can withstand it better. Let's move on to the next one. Chinese sellers on Amazon panic after Trump's tariff bazooka. This is on Wednesday, but last time the tariffs we talked about were about 89%, I believe, or 79, I forgot. But now it's 145% plus Section 301's tariffs, which can go up to 25%. So it's 145 plus 25, meaning it's going to be 170 now, top line. Like, that's the most you can get. So if you're doing like a 25% Section 301 tariff category plus the 145, you're paying 170% of customs value at import, which is nosebleedingly high. I mean, that will put out businesses. Like, I know people with shipments, they're paying almost 5 times more what they usually would prior to the tariffs for importing into the US. Like, the cost of shipping and paying duties, 5 times is a lot. So imagine your usual cost to ship a container, or sorry, let's say like your usual shipment's $4,000 or $5,000, you're paying $25,000 now. That could really, really bankrupt a small business real fast. All right, President Trump announced tariffs on Wednesday to 125%, which is now clarified on Thursday to 145% on top of the Section 301 tariff. And you can see here, majority of Amazon sellers are from China. If you follow me, you know that majority are 70-80% are from China. Amazon has been courting Chinese sellers for the longest time, and they did a great job. That's why we have all these sellers from China. You can see Shenzhen tops of the list. I mean, by a far margin. Like, that's crazy. But I believe it. There's a city in Shenzhen where they built just for e-commerce sellers. Like, it's a complete city, like, design for e-commerce business. All the logistics companies are there. They have like agencies doing media stuff, advertising, probably black hat tricks for all we know. Most likely, actually guarantee they have black hat companies there, which is like cheating the Amazon algorithm. And yeah, supply chain assistance. So everything for e-commerce built into a city, they have that in Shenzhen. That's why I think most of them are there. And I'm sure they give like incentives for e-commerce businesses too. But you can see that most are in other cities as well. You got Guangzhou, Putian, Dongguan. Those are manufacturing hubs, or Guangzhou is obviously capital of the Guangdong province. So a lot of Chinese cities rank the top. Then you got New York, Miami, kind of mixed in there, LA. But then you go back to the rest of the Chinese cities. Like Foshan is a manufacturing hub for furniture in the Guangdong region as well. And these tariffs are a crushing blow. I'm struggling with my imports, but luckily we have a gap between the tariffs, and like a lot of our shipments arrived right before the tariffs. Luckily, we got some caught in between now, but we're lucky that we only had a couple shipments on the water when the tariffs kicked in. But if someone has a lot of shipments, like majority of their shipments for the next 3-4 months of inventory on the water, as soon as the tariff hits, that's a lot of money out of pocket they got to pay at the border, and that's gonna hurt, and it could even break a lot of small businesses. Wang Xin, head of Shenzhen Cross-Border E-Commerce Association, that's the people managing that town probably, of e-commerce business, which represents over 3,000 Amazon sellers, told Reuters this isn't just a tax issue, the entire cost structure gets completely overwhelmed, adding it'll be very hard for anyone to survive in the US market. I would say anyone that doesn't have a strong brand. If you have a strong brand, you can probably weather this. It won't be great. I mean, you're going to lose revenue top line for sure, but you'll still get a good market share of what the existing sales are online. But those who purely compete on price, they're done. They're going to have such a hard time competing. Wang called President Trump's tariff a truly unprecedented blow. Reuters spoke with other sellers about the turmoil unfolding in China. Of the 5 sellers who spoke to Reuters, 3 said they would look to raise prices to their exports to the US, while the 2 will plan to leave the market completely. And that makes sense. Either you raise prices and try to hold out, or if the margins are so low, it's not worth your time anyways, just quit. And that's the reality of it now. Dave Fong, whose products range from school bags to Bluetooth speakers, said on Thursday he has raised prices in the U.S. by up to 30% and would let inventory levels fall and lower spending on Amazon advertising fees, which once took up 40% of its U.S. revenue. 40% of U.S. revenue to ads. That's a crazy amount of ad spend. Wow, he must have some crazy margins if he's spending 40% on ads. For us and anyone else, you can't just rely on the U.S. market. It's quite clear. Fong said, we have to reduce investment and put more resources in regions like Europe, Canada, Mexico, and the rest of the world. I mean, what's the stat? Like $1 in $3 spent on consumption in the world's from a U.S. consumer. That's a lot. That's a 33% market you just basically saying you're going to walk away from or uninvest from or divest from. On Wednesday, word spread that a document viewed by Bloomberg specified that Amazon reduced its exposure by slashing shipments of Chinese products, which I guess I'll inject this article here, where Amazon reportedly canceled some orders of Chinese goods as tariff war continues. Some is an understatement. I've been reading articles where there are shipments of summer goods like beach chairs, umbrellas, like towels, to Q4 orders of Christmas stuff, all canceled from Amazon. They're just removing all existing orders from China because they're not going to pay for those tariffs. They're going to look elsewhere. And that's the effect of the tariffs, right? It's going to really move big selling companies, like big traders, e-retailers, probably north of 9-figure revenue to other countries because they have the power to move to other countries and get manufacturers to cooperate with them. But for a lot of smaller sellers, which makes up, I would say, majority of the Amazon Seller Central network, for those small people under, I would say it's $10 million in revenue, they really don't have much of a choice. They either have to tough it out or give up. And that's what's happening now. You can see here, these are all the trading partners for Amazon. They're all Shenzhen, Foshan, Shenzhen. These are all trading companies. They probably just procure a lot from Chinese factories and sell it to Amazon. Brian Miller, who sold on Amazon for 7 years, told Reuters, I don't see a scenario if things don't change that serving the U.S. from China is viable anymore, and manufacturing that serves the U.S. will have to be transferred to other countries like Vietnam or Mexico. And that's, if this keeps up, yeah. Especially at 175%. Why sellers do not heed Trump's warning about the tariff war for the last decade is beyond comprehension and inexcusable. Clearly their loss. And for those who listen and either friend-shored or re-shored supply chains out of China, it shows a picture of a smart man. The thing is, like I said, the small sellers have no choice. Where you're going to find, there are certain factories in China that just make those certain products. No one else does it. And they have the tooling, right? You're just buying it OEM from them, and they're your suppliers. You can't just go to Vietnam and say, hey, I want to buy this, because they have to make the tooling. That means you have to pay for it. But if you don't have the volume, it's not worth it. So that's the issue. For small sellers, that is. The silver lining is that high tariffs on China will begin to stop cheap Chinese junk flooding this nation. Americans need to detox from their obsession of cheap Chinese products that routinely break or become broken. And we've done this before, where it talks about Reagan tariffing Japanese electronics. Now the hardest part of restarting America's industrial base. Okay, let's exit out of this. Let's talk about my thought process and whether there'll be a trade deal or not. That goes back to where it was before. And I've been thinking about it. There are multiple factors stopping the Chinese from coming to the table and making a deal with the US. The first thing is more cultural, the face saving culture. In Asia, there's a big face culture, meaning it's like your external perception of yourself. I think that's the best way of putting it in English, where you need to project yourself with a manner, like in a way that is perceived as superior or proud, right? You don't want to be looked down upon. And for Chinese now, or especially Xi Jinping specifically, because he's the one in charge, he's already drummed the national drum beat for a long time, and they've dialed it up. Like nationalism in China, it's was already all-time high before this. Now it's just like fanatical level. They've said they're going to fight to the end. They're going to do whatever it takes. Like, this is a continuation of years of humiliation or whatever they always say. So for them to come to the negotiating table now would be a loss of face. So I just don't. That'll be one of the main big factors preventing this from going to the negotiation table and making a deal. The second thing is, now the Chinese government has a scapegoat for the economic problems. They've been struggling, the Chinese economy, that is, have been struggling for a while now. 40 months of continuous deflation, that's not good for an economy. Real estate market dropped by, in some cities, up to 50% in value, which is lots and lots of money just wiped out. Trade with European markets and other markets are oversaturating. They have an oversupply in their manufacturing. A lot of headwinds for their economy. And it's been showing. Unemployment's high, especially youth unemployment. And there's discontent in the population about whether centralized planning and communism is the right future for them. And now they can say, well, it's America's fault. They did this to us. We have to fight. We have to suffer and fight because that's the way to a better future. And it will most likely work. But in terms of like boosting the nationalism and blaming on America for all the problems. Obviously, the trade war will have an effect on the economy, but it's not the source of the problem, right? So this is a great opportunity for China to convince its population it's the U.S.'s fault, and now we have to endure, right? They've mentioned this before. Like it's gonna be a period of I guess hardships, and we have to endure through it, and that will help them sort of deflect blame for the existing economic issues in China. So that's another point that is working against a trade deal being made. The last part is, if they do make a deal with the U.S., it will probably be beginning of the end of the Chinese Communist Party. Because I fundamentally believe that that Trump wants to have reciprocal trade, as in free trade. Like, you let us do business in your country, like we have always let you do business in our country. You can't block out our technology companies, you can't block out our investment businesses, banks and whatnot. You have to open up all your sectors to us with no discrimination, right? And in exchange, we'll drop ours and let you do business freely in our economy as well. And that would really mean that China has to remove the Great Firewall. Right now, the entire Chinese internet is like wired to a server somewhere in a bunker in Beijing, and everything is completely controlled. Their entire perception of the world is controlled by Beijing because there's no free internet. Everything's controlled by the government. And if the technology companies come in and all these foreign businesses come in to do business, they're going to need the internet to access the outside world to do business, because that's what globalism is. We have access to each other's economies. And if they lose the power to control information that the Chinese population consumes, then they have no longer ability to shape the Chinese population's perspective on the world. And that could really mean that they'll really find out what's going on in the world and start to think, hey, this doesn't seem right. Like, maybe we should have a different party. We should have elections that may be more capitalistic instead of sort of like a fascist technocratic state where national champions gets all the government funding, and then while the smaller companies have to pay high interest rates compared to these national champions. And as a result of that, I think it's almost catch-22, right? Either damned if you do and damned if you don't, but you have a better chance of controlling your outcome if you you stick to the controlling of information, keep the trade barriers up, and just ride it out, convince the population that times are going to be tough, and buckle up and just trust in the party. And that's why it's highly unlikely, I think, or there's more of a chance, like 60-40, where a deal won't be struck, and we'll carry on the day as with the tariffs. So that's my take on it, but hopefully I'm wrong, and we'll see. Or if I'm right, then we'll have to take the right actions to continue on. That's what we do. We just learn about the information and just make the best of it and take the right course of action. Well, I think I've rambled on way longer than I want. I hope this video was helpful. It was off the cuff, so I apologize that it may have been just longer, or not as concise as it could be, but I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think about these tariffs, how you're overcoming these, and what you plan to do in the future. Anyways, thank you for stopping by. If you stay all the way to the end, appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.